The hammer struck molten iron with such force that sparks erupted like tiny stars across the blacksmith's forge. Each strike a testament to Colton Kershaw's strength, as he shaped horseshoes and wagon fittings in the sweltering heat of St. Louis. But tonight, as he wiped the soot from his brow and stared at his calloused hands, he knew something had to change. The city had grown too crowded, too suffocating. At 26 years old, Colton stood 6 feet 3 inches tall with shoulders broad enough to carry an anvil and arms corded with muscle from 7 years of hammering iron into submission. His dark hair fell past his collar, often tied back with a leather cord to keep it from his face while he worked. The forge had been his life since he was 19, apprenticed to old Master Thornton, who had taught him every secret of the blacksmith's trade. But Master Thornton was dead now, buried these 3 months past, and his son had sold the forge to a factory man who wanted to bring in machines and modern methods. Colton had saved his wages carefully, living in a cramped room above the forge and eating simple meals. He had nearly $800 tucked away in a leather pouch, enough to start fresh somewhere the air was clean, and a man could see the horizon. He had heard stories from travelers about the territories opening up westward, about Kansas, where the prairie stretched endless and towns were springing up along the railway lines. A man with his skills could make a decent living anywhere folks needed tools mended and horses shod. It was September of 1878 when Colton loaded his belongings onto a westbound train. Everything he owned fit into 2 canvas bags and a wooden toolbox containing his personal hammers, tongs, and measuring instruments. The railroad car was packed with families heading west seeking farmland, merchants chasing opportunity, and rough-looking men whose purposes Colton did not care to know. He kept to himself during the 3-day journey, watching the landscape transform from industrial smokestacks to rolling farmland to the vast prairie that seemed to swallow the sky. Wichita, Kansas was larger than he had expected when he stepped off the train. The town bustled with activity despite the late afternoon hour. Cattle pens stretched along the railway, filled with longhorns brought up from Texas by weather-beaten drovers. The main street featured a bank, a general store, 2 saloons, a church, and various other establishments. Wooden sidewalks lined the dusty road where wagons and horses moved in constant motion. Colton found lodging at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a stern-faced woman who nonetheless served generous portions at supper. He spent his first week in Wichita taking the measure of the town, learning that 2 blacksmiths already operated successful forges and had no need of another man's competition. His funds would not last forever, and he began to wonder if he had made a mistake leaving St. Louis. On his 8th day in Wichita, Colton was drinking coffee at a small restaurant when he overheard 2 ranchers discussing the difficulty of finding skilled labor willing to work in the more remote areas. One mentioned needing someone to repair equipment at a homestead about 30 miles northwest, up in the hills where the prairie began to give way to rougher country. "Excuse me," Colton interrupted, his deep voice drawing their attention. "I could not help but overhear. I am a blacksmith and metalworker. If you need repairs done, I am available." The older of the 2 ranchers, a grizzled man with a salt and pepper beard, looked him up and down with shrewd eyes. "You know anything about building, not just shoeing horses but actual construction work?" "My sister's place needs a barn raised and her fences mended. Lost everything in a fire last spring except the house." "I have worked construction," Colton said, which was true enough. He had helped build 3 forges from the ground up and had framed out several additions to workshops. "I am a quick learner for anything I have not done before. Name's William Winters," the rancher said, extending his hand. My sister Theodora runs a small horse ranch up in the hills. She is trying to rebuild but cannot afford to pay city wages. I could offer you room and board plus $3 a day for honest work. Probably 2 months' worth of labor if you are willing. $3 a day was less than half what Colton had earned in St. Louis, but room and board meant his savings would stretch further. More importantly, something about the idea of working in the hills appealed to him. He shook William's hand firmly. "When do I start?" "Day after tomorrow. I will meet you here at dawn with a wagon." Colton spent the next day purchasing supplies he thought he might need, including additional tools, leather work gloves, and sturdy canvas clothing suitable for outdoor labor. Mrs. Patterson packed him a food parcel when he explained he would be gone for a while, and she seemed almost sorry to see him leave despite their brief acquaintance. William Winters arrived exactly at dawn, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 draft horses. He was a man of few words during the long journey northwest, but what he did say painted a picture of his sister's situation. Theodora had married young to a horse breeder named Joseph Wright, who had known nearly everything about raising and training horses. They had built a modest but successful ranch together over 5 years of marriage, until Joseph had been thrown from a half-broken stallion and broke his neck. That had been 2 years ago. Theodora, only 24 at the time, had insisted on keeping the ranch going despite William's offers to bring her back to his larger spread. Then last April, a lightning strike had ignited her barn during a dry spell, and the fire had spread to her corrals and equipment shed. She had managed to save her breeding stock by releasing them into the open range, but nearly everything else was lost. Insurance money had covered rebuilding the house where the fire had scorched it, but there was not enough left for the barn and other structures she needed. "Theodora is proud," William said as they bounced along the rough trail. "She will not accept charity, but she will pay for honest work. Those $3 a day are coming from her pocket, not mine, though I will be helping with materials." "I understand," Colton replied, gripping the wagon seat as they navigated a particularly rough stretch. The landscape had changed dramatically from Wichita's flat prairie. Here the land rolled in gentle hills, covered with tall grass that rippled like water in the constant wind. Scattered groves of cottonwood and oak trees marked where seasonal creeks ran, their leaves just beginning to turn gold with the advancing autumn. Hawks circled overhead, and once Colton spotted a small herd of pronghorn antelope bounding away from the wagon's approach. They arrived at the Winters Wright Ranch in late afternoon. The house was a solid structure of whitewashed wood with a stone foundation, larger than Colton had expected, with a covered porch and real glass windows. But the devastation from the fire was evident everywhere else. Blackened posts marked where the barn had stood, though someone had cleared away most of the debris. Fragments of burned fencing stretched in broken lines across the nearest pastures. A small chicken coop and a springhouse were the only other structures still standing. What caught Colton's attention most, however, was the woman who emerged from the house as the wagon approached. Theodora Wright was not what he had expected. She wore men's work trousers and a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid that hung down past her shoulder blades. She stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall with a lean, strong build that spoke of physical labor. Her face was sun-bronzed and striking rather than conventionally pretty, with high cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes the color of summer sky that assessed Colton with frank wariness as William brought the wagon to a halt. "Theodora, this is Colton Kershaw, the man I told you about," William said, climbing down from the wagon. "Colton, my sister Theodora Wright. Colton removed his hat as he stepped down, nodding respectfully. "Madam, Mr. Kershaw." Her voice was clear and measured, neither warm nor cold. "My brother says you are a blacksmith who knows construction." "Yes, madam. I worked 7 years in a forge in St. Louis, and I have built or helped build several structures. I am here to do whatever work you need done." Her eyes flickered to his shoulders and arms, clearly evaluating his physical strength, then back to his face. "The barn is the priority. I need it finished before winter or I will lose the breeding season. I have 6 mares I need to shelter properly, including 2 who should foal in early spring." "I will start on it tomorrow," Colton said simply. Something in his directness seemed to satisfy her. She gave a short nod. "You will stay in the old ranch hand's cabin. It is small but weatherproof. Meals are at sunrise, noon, and sunset. I expect a full day's work for a full day's pay." "You will get it." William stayed for supper, which Theodora prepared with efficient competence. The meal was simple but hearty: venison stew with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread, and strong coffee. The conversation remained practical, focused on the materials William had brought in his wagon and what additional supplies would be needed. Colton learned that Theodora had 6 horses currently, the 6 brood mares and 1 aging gelding she used for ranch work. She had sold off most of her stock after the fire to raise cash, keeping only her best breeding animals. After William departed, Theodora showed Colton to the cabin. It was indeed small, perhaps 12 feet square, with a narrow bed, a potbelly stove, a table, and 1 chair. But it was clean and solid, with a good roof and a door that latched properly. "There is a creek about 200 yards that way," Theodora said, pointing north. "Fresh water. The outhouse is behind the chicken coop. I expect you up and working by 6 o'clock." "I will be ready," Colton assured her. She studied him for a moment in the fading light, her expression unreadable. "My brother speaks highly of your work ethic. I hope he is right about you, Mr. Kershaw. I cannot afford to waste time or money." "I will not waste either, madam." She nodded curtly and walked back toward the main house, her stride long and confident. Colton watched her go, then turned to unpack his few belongings in his new temporary home. The next morning, Colton was indeed up before 6, washing in the cold creek water and dressing in his work clothes. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, painting the grasslands in shades of pink and gold. The air was crisp and clean in a way city air never was, and despite the hard work ahead, Colton felt something in his chest loosen slightly. Theodora had breakfast ready when he knocked at the kitchen door. Eggs from her chickens, thick slices of bacon, and more of that good bread with butter and jam. She ate with him at the kitchen table, and he noticed her hands were as calloused as his own, her nails cut short and practical. "The foundation posts for the barn are still solid," she explained between bites. "Joseph set them deep with concrete bases. The frame is what needs rebuilding, and then the siding and roof. I have the dimensions sketched out." She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, unfolding it to reveal a surprisingly detailed architectural drawing. 40 feet by 60 feet with a hayloft and 6 box stalls plus a tack room. Colton studied the sketch, impressed by its precision. "You drew this," Joseph taught me. "We built the original barn together." A shadow crossed her face, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Can you work from this?" "Yes, madam. This is excellent work. You have measurements for everything I need." Her expression softened slightly, the first hint of approval he had seen. "Good. The lumber is stacked over by what used to be the equipment shed. William brought most of what you will need, but let me know if you are missing anything." They worked out a system over the following days. Colton would begin each morning by reviewing the day's tasks with Theodora. who proved to have a solid understanding of construction principles. She was not content to let him work alone. She showed up in the mornings with her own tool belt and worked alongside him, measuring and cutting lumber, holding beams steady while he nailed them in place, and generally making herself useful. At first, Colton was uncertain about this arrangement. He had never worked with a woman on a construction site before. But Theodora quickly proved she was no delicate flower. She could handle a hammer competently, had a good eye for level and square, and was not afraid of heights when they began framing the upper structure. She was also not much for conversation while working, which suited Colton fine. They developed an efficient rhythm, communicating in brief sentences and hand signals. What conversation they did have came during the midday meal break, when Theodora would bring out sandwiches and water, and they would sit in the shade of the house to eat. "How did you end up in Wichita?" she asked on the third day, her tone more curious than interrogative. "The forge where I worked was sold," Colton replied, watching a hawk circle overhead. "I wanted a change from city life, heard there were opportunities in Kansas." "And are there?" He glanced at her, noting the slight irony in her voice. "Too early to say for certain. But I like it better than St. Louis so far." "Why? I can breathe here, can see the sky." She nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense to her. "That is why I refused to leave when Joseph died. William wanted me to move to his ranch, be a spinster aunt to his children, but this land—" She gestured at the rolling hills around them. "This is freedom, even after everything you lost, especially after." Her jaw set stubbornly. "Fire cannot take the land itself, cannot take the sky or the wind or the space to move and breathe. Buildings can be rebuilt." Colton found himself respecting her philosophy, even as he recognized the loneliness that probably accompanied it. "No other family besides William. Our parents are dead. Cholera took them when I was 16. William raised me as best he could while running his ranch." She took a long drink of water. "What about you?" "I have a mother and 2 sisters back in Ohio, have not seen them in 5 years. The admission brought a familiar pang of guilt. "I send money when I can. But you do not visit. My stepfather and I do not see eye to eye, easier to stay away." Theodora did not press for details, which Colton appreciated. They finished their meal in companionable silence and returned to work. As the days passed and the barn began to take shape, Colton found himself looking forward to those midday conversations. Theodora remained reserved, but she slowly revealed more about herself. She talked about her horses with genuine passion, explaining bloodlines and training techniques with the kind of expertise that came from deep knowledge. She had been working with horses since childhood, she told him, and Joseph had recognized her natural talent immediately when they met. "How did you meet him?" Colton asked one day while they were positioning roof beams. "At a horse auction in Dodge City. I was 20, helping William buy breeding stock. Joseph was there selling 3-year-olds he had trained. We started talking about conformation and training methods, and 5 hours later we were still talking." A genuine smile touched her lips, brief and bittersweet. "He proposed 3 weeks later. William thought we were both crazy, but Joseph and I knew. You must have been happy together." "We were." She hammered in a nail with more force than necessary, and then he was gone, just like that. 1 second riding a horse, the next second dead on the ground with a broken neck. Colton understood grief, had seen it enough in the city when cholera or consumption took someone suddenly. "I am sorry. It has been 2 years. People tell me I should move on, maybe remarry." Her voice was flat. "But I am not interested in finding another husband just to have someone take care of me. I can take care of myself." "That is clear enough," Colton agreed and meant it. She shot him a sharp look, as if expecting mockery, but found only honest acknowledgement in his expression. After a moment, she nodded and returned to work. The barn was half-framed when the first real test of their working relationship came. Colton was positioning a heavy crossbeam alone, trying to maneuver it into the support brackets while balanced on a ladder. The beam was awkward, more than impossibly heavy, but the angle was wrong and his grip started to slip. Before he could call out, Theodora was there, scrambling up her own ladder to take the other end of the beam, her face set with concentration. "On 3, she said calmly. 1, 2, 3. Together they lifted the beam into place, and Colton secured it with quick hammer strikes while Theodora braced it steady. When it was done, they were both breathing hard from the exertion. "Thank you," Colton said. "Cannot have you breaking your neck," Theodora replied, but there was a hint of warmth in her voice. "Then I would have to finish this barn myself." It was the first time she had made anything resembling a joke around him, and Colton found himself grinning. That would be a tragedy. Her lips quirked upward. "Get back to work, Mr. Kershaw." After that, something shifted between them. The reserve did not disappear entirely, but it eased. They talked more during meals, sharing stories about their pasts. Colton told her about learning the blacksmith trade, about the satisfaction of shaping raw metal into useful tools. Theodora described growing up on the prairie, learning to ride before she could properly walk, helping William with roundups and brandings. "You never wanted a more conventional life?" Colton asked. "City dresses and tea parties," Theodora snorted. "I went to a tea party once when I was 15. One of the ranchers' wives thought I needed civilizing. I lasted 20 minutes before I excused myself and went to help with a difficult foaling in their barn." She shook her head. "I am not suited for that world." "Nothing wrong with knowing who you are," Colton observed. "Most men do not see it that way. They want a woman who will be decorative and obedient." Her tone was matter of fact rather than bitter. Joseph was different. He wanted a partner. Colton thought about that as they worked through the afternoon. He found himself admiring Theodora's competence and self-sufficiency, the way she moved with purpose and confidence. She was unlike any woman he had known in St. Louis, where even the working-class women affected a certain delicacy. Theodora was direct and honest, unafraid of hard work or speaking her mind. He also could not help noticing other things. The way the afternoon sun caught gold highlights in her hair when she pulled off her work hat. The strength in her arms and shoulders as she lifted lumber. The rare smile that transformed her serious face into something genuinely beautiful. These were dangerous thoughts for a hired man, and Colton tried to push them aside. He was here to do a job, earn some money, and move on to whatever came next. Getting attached to William Winter's widowed sister was not part of the plan. But intentions and reality had a way of diverging. 3 weeks into the project, a late September storm rolled across the prairie with little warning. Colton and Theodora were working on the barn roof when the sky suddenly darkened and wind began gusting hard enough to make the partial structure sway. Theodora looked at the approaching wall of clouds and cursed. "We need to get down now," she said sharply. "Prairie storms can be vicious." They scrambled down their ladders as the first raindrops began to fall, fat and heavy. By the time they reached the ground, the rain was a downpour, and the wind was screaming across the open land. Theodora grabbed Colton's arm and pulled him toward the house. "The cabin is too far," she shouted over the wind. "Come on." They burst through the kitchen door drenched and breathing hard. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making the windows rattle. Through the rain-blurred glass, Colton could see the world had disappeared into a gray curtain of water. "That was close," Theodora said, pushing wet hair out of her face. She was soaked through, her shirt clinging to her frame, and she seemed suddenly aware of how close they were standing. She stepped back quickly. "I will get towels." Colton stood dripping on the kitchen floor, acutely conscious that they were alone in the house together. It was the first time he had been inside the main house beyond the kitchen. When Theodora returned with 2 towels, he dried his face and hair, uncertain of the proper protocol. "You should wait out the storm here," Theodora said, her tone carefully neutral. "It may last hours. I will make coffee." She busied herself with the stove while Colton dried off as best he could. The kitchen was warm and smelled of bread and herbs. Through an open doorway, he could see into what appeared to be a sitting room with comfortable furniture and framed photographs on the walls. "Do storms like this happen often?" he asked, more to fill the silence than because he needed to know. "Common enough in spring and fall." "Summer too, sometimes." Theodora poured coffee into 2 mugs and handed him one. "The first year Joseph and I lived here, a tornado touched down about 2 miles from the house. We spent half an hour in the root cellar while it passed. Must have been frightening." "It was exhilarating," she corrected, her eyes lighting up. "Dangerous, yes, but there is something magnificent about that kind of power, the raw force of nature with nothing to contain it." Colton recognized the passion in her voice, the same tone she used when talking about her horses or the land itself. Theodora was someone who needed space and intensity, who chafed against restrictions and conventions. It was part of what drew him to her, though he was only beginning to acknowledge that attraction to himself. They sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee while the storm raged outside. The afternoon light had faded to an early twilight, and Theodora lit oil lamps against the gloom. The domestic intimacy of the moment was not lost on Colton. He was intensely aware of her presence across the table, of the way the lamplight softened her angular features. "Tell me about St. Louis," Theodora said eventually. "What was it like living in a city?" Colton considered how to explain it. "Crowded, dirty. Always noise, always smoke from the factories and forges. Buildings pressed so close together you could barely see the sky between them." He paused. "But there was excitement too. New things happening constantly. People from everywhere speaking different languages, bringing different ideas. Do you miss it?" "I miss some things. Hot baths whenever I wanted them. Theaters and music halls. Being able to buy whatever I needed from a shop." He met her eyes. "But no, I do not miss the city itself. I like it better here. Even with fewer comforts. Some comforts are not worth the price they cost." Theodora nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. "Joseph used to say something similar. He grew up in Kansas City, came west because he could not stand being hemmed in by civilization. Sounds like he understood what mattered." "He did." She was quiet for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Would you like to see the rest of the house, since you are stuck here anyway?" "If you do not mind showing me." She led him through the sitting room, which was furnished with solid, handmade pieces. The photographs on the walls showed Theodora at various ages with people Colton assumed were family members. One frame held a wedding photograph. Theodora looking impossibly young in a simple white dress, standing beside a tall, lean man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "That is Joseph," she said unnecessarily, following his gaze. "He looks like a good man, the best I ever knew." There was finality in her tone, as if she was stating an immutable fact. She showed him the rest of the house. A dining room they clearly did not use often. 2 bedrooms upstairs and Joseph's office, which Theodora had left largely unchanged. Books on horse breeding and ranch management filled shelves along one wall. A large desk held papers and journals, and more photographs decorated the available space. "I cannot bring myself to clear it out," Theodora admitted, standing in the doorway. "It feels like erasing him." "Maybe you are not supposed to clear it out," Colton suggested. Maybe you keep it because it keeps part of him alive." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Most people tell me I need to let go of the past. I am not most people." The storm continued through the evening. Theodora insisted on making supper, and they ate together at the kitchen table as darkness fell completely outside. The conversation ranged widely, touching on books they had read, places they hoped to see someday, their opinions on everything from politics to the best way to train a young horse. Colton found himself talking more freely than he had with anyone in years. There was something about Theodora that invited honesty, perhaps because she was so unflinchingly honest herself. She did not play games or hide behind false pleasantries. When she disagreed with him, she said so plainly and explained why. When she found something he said interesting, her face showed genuine engagement. "You are different from what I expected," Theodora said as they cleaned up after the meal. "What did you expect?" "I am not sure. Someone more rough, perhaps, more crude. Most of the ranch hands and drovers I have known are not exactly refined company. I spent 7 years working in a forge, not 7 years in a monastery," Colton said with a slight smile. "But my mother raised me to have manners and use them. She did well." Theodora dried the last plate and set it aside. "The storm is easing. You should probably head back to the cabin before it is too dark to see." Colton recognized the dismissal for what it was, not rudeness, but Theodora being careful about propriety. He had been alone with her in her house for hours, and while nothing improper had occurred, he understood her need to maintain boundaries. "Thank you for the hospitality," he said, meaning it. "Thank you for the company." She walked him to the door. "We should be able to work tomorrow if the ground is not too muddy." The rain had indeed eased to a drizzle, and Colton made his way through the darkness to the cabin by the light of the lamp Theodora had lent him. His clothes were still damp and uncomfortable, but his mind was too active to care much. He lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the rain patter on the roof and thinking about the woman in the main house. He was falling for her. The admission was both exhilarating and terrifying. Colton had been attracted to women before, had even courted a few back in Ohio before moving to St. Louis. But what he felt developing for Theodora was different. It was not just desire, though he certainly felt that. It was admiration, respect, genuine enjoyment of her company. It was the way his day felt more complete when she smiled, the way he found himself wanting to tell her things he barely admitted to himself. But Theodora had made it clear she was not interested in remarrying, and Colton was just a temporary worker passing through her life. Getting his heart broken over a woman who still wore her wedding ring seemed like a foolish choice. Yet the heart, Colton was learning, did not much care about wisdom. Work continued on the barn through October. The structure took shape day by day, its frame rising sturdy and square against the autumn sky. Colton took pride in the craftsmanship, ensuring every joint was tight and every measurement precise. This was not just another job. He realized with some surprise that he wanted to build something lasting for Theodora, something that would shelter her horses and stand strong against the prairie storms. Theodora noticed the extra care he took, though she did not comment on it directly. Instead, she brought him fresh apple pie one afternoon, setting it down beside him without ceremony. "What is this for?" Colton asked. "You are doing good work, better than I expected." She met his eyes steadily. "I appreciate it." The pie was excellent, sweet and tart, and still warm from the oven. Colton ate it while sitting on a stack of lumber, watching Theodora work with one of her mares in the makeshift corral she had constructed. The mare was a beautiful bay with a white blaze, clearly pregnant and due to foal in the spring. Theodora moved around the horse with calm confidence, checking her hooves and running experienced hands over her legs and belly. The afternoon sun slanted golden across the prairie, and for a moment, Colton allowed himself to imagine this was his life. Not temporarily, but permanently. Coming home to this land, to this house, to this woman. Building things and working with his hands while Theodora raised her horses. It was a simple vision, almost painfully sweet in its domesticity. He shook himself mentally. Dangerous thoughts again. But as October progressed, Colton found those dangerous thoughts becoming harder to dismiss. He and Theodora had developed an easy partnership that extended beyond the barn construction. When one of her mares developed a cracked hoof, Colton fashioned a special shoe to support it while the hoof healed. When he needed help repairing the fence line, Theodora worked alongside him without being asked, her skill with tools nearly matching his own. They talked constantly now, about everything and nothing. Theodora told him about the wild horses she sometimes saw running in the hills, the Mustang herds that descended from Spanish stock centuries old. Colton described the Mississippi River, which she had never seen, and the great bridges being built across it. They discovered a shared love of thunderstorms, of starry nights, of the way prairie grass moved like water in the wind. "You will leave when the barn is finished," Theodora said one evening. It was not a question. They were sitting on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The barn was nearly complete, needing only the final roof shingles and the door installations. Another week, perhaps 2, and the job would be done. That was the arrangement, Colton said carefully. You could stay, not as hired labor, but... She trailed off, seeming uncertain how to continue. But what? Theodora was quiet for a long moment, her profile silhouetted against the fading light. I do not know, she finally admitted. I just know that I have become accustomed to having you here. To working with you, to talking with you. She turned to look at him directly. It will be strange when you are gone. Colton's heart was beating faster than it should. It will be strange for me too. Then perhaps you should consider staying. In what capacity? He needed to hear her say it, needed to understand what she was offering. As my partner, in the ranch. Theodora's hands twisted in her lap, a rare show of nervousness. I cannot pay you wages indefinitely, but the ranch is starting to rebuild. In a few years, it could be profitable again. We could work it together, split the earnings. It was a generous offer, a practical offer, and it was not at all what Colton wanted. As business partners, he said flatly, something flickered in Theodora's expression. What else would you want to be? This was the moment. Colton could let it pass, accept the partnership she offered, hope that maybe someday she might see him as more than a convenient business arrangement. Or he could be honest, risk rejection, and at least know where he stood. I would want to be your husband, Colton said quietly. Theodora went very still. In the fading light, he could not quite read her expression. I know you said you are not interested in remarrying, he continued, the words coming faster now that he had started. I know you love Joseph and maybe you still do. I am not asking you to forget him or replace him. But Theodora, these past 2 months working with you, talking with you, learning who you are, I have fallen in love with you, completely and thoroughly in love with you. The silence stretched out, broken only by the evening sounds of crickets and a distant coyote howl. I am still in love with Joseph, Theodora finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit like a hammer blow, but Colton forced himself to nod. I understand. No, let me finish. She turned to face him fully. I am still in love with Joseph, and I probably always will be. He was my first love, my first everything. Losing him nearly destroyed me. She took a shaky breath. But he has been dead for 2 years, and you, Colton Kershaw, are very much alive. Hope flared in Colton's chest, almost painful in its intensity. "I did not want to feel this way," Theodora continued. "I tried not to. You were supposed to be just another hired worker here and gone, but you are not. You are kind and skilled, and you make me laugh. You treat me like a partner, not a delicate thing to be managed. You see me as I actually am, and you seem to like what you see." "I more than like what I see," Colton said. "I know." A small, wondering smile touched her lips. "I can see it in the way you look at me." "I have been trying to ignore it, but I cannot anymore. Because, Colton, I think I am falling in love with you too, and that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I already lost one husband. The thought of opening my heart again, of being that vulnerable again, knowing that death or disaster could take you away at any moment." She wrapped her arms around herself. "It is terrifying." Colton moved closer slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not, he took her hands in his, feeling how cold her fingers were despite the mild evening. "I cannot promise I will live forever," he said. "None of us can. But Theodora, I can promise that for however long I have, I will love you with everything I am. I will be your partner in truth, not just in business. I will help you build this ranch into something magnificent, and I will never, ever ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are." Tears were sliding down Theodora's cheeks now, catching the last light of the sunset. "It has only been 2 months. People will say we are rushing." "Do you care what people say?" A laugh broke through her tears. "No, no, I really do not." "Then marry me," Colton said. "Not to forget Joseph, but to build a new future, one we create together." Theodora searched his face in the gathering darkness, and whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy something deep within her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Colton, I will marry you." He kissed her then, gently at first, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. But Theodora kissed him back with a fierceness that took his breath away, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders as if anchoring herself to something solid in a shifting world. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and Colton could feel his heart racing. "I love you," Theodora said, and hearing those words from her lips was sweeter than anything Colton had ever known. "I love you too," he replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They sat on the porch until full darkness fell, talking about the future they would build together. Theodora wanted to expand the horse breeding operation, acquire more quality mares and eventually a championship stallion. Colton thought they could also offer blacksmithing services to neighboring ranches, build a proper forge on the property. They talked about the barn they were finishing, about building additional corrals and maybe even a bunkhouse if they eventually hired ranch hands. "We should tell William," Theodora said eventually. "He will have opinions." "Will he object?" "Probably." She sounded unconcerned. "He thinks I should remain a grieving widow forever, or at least remarry someone with significant property. But William does not get to dictate my life." Colton admired her certainty, even as he worried slightly about her brother's reaction. William had hired him, trusted him. Would he see this engagement as a betrayal of that trust? They decided to wait until the barn was completely finished before making any announcements. That gave them just over a week of keeping their engagement secret. A week of stolen kisses when they were sure no one could see. Of hands touching perhaps more often than necessary when they passed tools back and forth. Of long conversations on the porch after the sun went down. Colton had never been happier. The work was satisfying, the land was beautiful, and he was in love with an extraordinary woman who loved him back. When he lay in his narrow cabin bed at night, he let himself imagine the future in vivid detail. Waking up next to Theodora every morning. Building their ranch together. Maybe children someday, if they were blessed. Growing old watching the prairie grass wave in the wind. The barn was completed on a crisp November morning. Colton installed the final door hinge and stepped back to admire their work. The structure stood solid and proud, its fresh lumber golden in the autumn sunlight. 40 feet by 60 feet, with a steep roof to shed snow and rain, 6 box stalls for horses, a tack room, and a generous hayloft. It was some of the best work Colton had ever done. Theodora walked through the completed barn with undisguised satisfaction, checking every detail. When she finally emerged, her smile was radiant. "It is perfect," she said simply. "Better than the original barn Joseph and I built. We should celebrate," Colton suggested. "We should tell William," Theodora countered. "Get it over with." They rode together to William Winter's ranch, which was about 15 miles southeast of Theodora's property. Colton rode the old gelding while Theodora sat her favorite mare with the ease of someone born in a saddle. The November day was cool but clear, the sky that brilliant blue that seemed unique to Kansas. William's ranch was considerably larger than Theodora's, with a sprawling house, multiple barns, and extensive corrals filled with cattle and horses. He emerged from the house when he saw them approach, his weathered face showing surprise at the unexpected visit. "Theodora, Mr. Kershaw," he nodded to each of them. "Did not expect to see you today. Is the barn finished?" "It is," Theodora confirmed, dismounting in one fluid motion. "We need to talk to you, William." Something in her tone must have alerted him. William's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked between them. "Come inside." They settled in his sitting room, William's wife Sarah bringing coffee and then tactfully disappearing. William waited until they each had a cup before speaking. "Well," Theodora took a breath, "Colton and I are getting married." William's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally resignation. "You have known each other 2 months. I know." "Theodora, you are still mourning Joseph." "I will always mourn Joseph," Theodora said steadily, "but I am also allowed to live my own life and make my own choices. I love Colton. He loves me. We are getting married." William turned his attention to Colton, his gaze hard and assessing. "You came here as hired labor. Now you are marrying my widowed sister and her ranch. Convenient." "William," Theodora's voice was sharp with warning, but Colton raised a hand to stop her. "Mr. Winters, I understand your suspicion. If I were in your position, I would feel the same." He met William's eyes directly. "I did not come here looking for a wife or a ranch. I came looking for honest work. What developed between Theodora and me was unexpected for both of us. But it is real. I love your sister for who she is, not for what she owns. Pretty words. They are true words." Colton kept his voice calm but firm. "I will sign any legal document you want before the wedding. Something stating I have no claim to the ranch if the marriage ends, that everything remains in Theodora's name. Would that satisfy your concerns?" William looked startled, as if he had not expected that offer. He glanced at his sister, who was watching Colton with an expression of surprise and something deeper. "You would do that?" William asked. "Of course. I am marrying Theodora, not her property." The tension in the room eased slightly. William sat back in his chair, studying Colton with new eyes. "Joseph was a good man, the best, if you hurt my sister." "I will not," Colton said simply. Sarah reappeared in the doorway, having clearly been listening from the next room. "Oh, for heaven's sake, William. Look at how they look at each other. Anyone can see they are in love." She came over to kiss Theodora's cheek. "Congratulations, dear. I think it is wonderful." Her intervention seemed to settle something for William. He sighed heavily, then extended his hand to Colton. "Take care of her." "I will," Colton promised, shaking the offered hand firmly. The wedding was planned for the first week of December, giving them just under a month to prepare. Theodora wanted a small ceremony, family only, in the church in Wichita. Sarah took charge of organizing the practical details with the efficiency of someone who genuinely enjoyed such tasks. Theodora bore it all with good humor, though she drew the line at an elaborate dress. "I am a ranch woman getting married for the second time," she told Sarah firmly. "I will wear my best dress, and that will suffice." Colton spent the intervening weeks building furniture for the house. Theodora had insisted he move into one of the spare bedrooms rather than continue sleeping in the cabin, citing both propriety and practicality. They were engaged now, after all, even if certain aspects of their relationship would wait until after the wedding. He built them a new bed, larger and sturdier than the one Theodora had shared with Joseph. He constructed a wardrobe for their clothes and a chest for blankets and linens. Each piece was made with care and attention to detail, built to last generations. Working with wood was different from hammering iron, but Colton found he enjoyed the craft of it, the way the grain and texture of the lumber guided his hands. Theodora watched him work sometimes, leaning against the doorframe of what would become their shared bedroom. "You are good at this," she observed one afternoon, "building furniture, building a life." She came to run her hand along the smooth surface of the wardrobe. "You have made this place feel more like home than it has in 2 years." Colton set down his plane and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. She came willingly, resting her head against his chest. These moments of quiet intimacy had become precious to both of them. The passionate kisses were exhilarating, but this simple comfort of being held was equally important. "I want you to be happy here," Colton murmured against her hair. "I am happy. Happier than I thought I would ever be again." She pulled back enough to look up at him. "Are you happy?" "Extraordinarily happy." "Even though you are marrying a bossy woman who wears trousers and works like a ranch hand," Colton laughed. "Especially because I am marrying a bossy woman who wears trousers and works like a ranch hand. I would not want you any other way." "Good." "Because I am not changing. I would never ask you to." November passed in a blur of activity. The prairie turned brown and gold, the grasses dying back for winter. The horses grew thick winter coats, and Theodora began bringing them into the new barn at night to protect them from the increasingly cold temperatures. Colton built feed bins and installed mangers in each stall, making sure everything was ready for the long Kansas winter. He also began building a proper forge. There was enough demand from neighboring ranches for blacksmithing services that it made financial sense, and Colton missed the work. He chose a spot near the barn where fire would not pose a threat to the wooden structures and began laying a stone foundation for the forge itself. "You are going to work yourself to death before the wedding," Theodora told him one evening, watching him haul stones into place. "I want to be useful. Want to contribute. Colton, you have already contributed more than you realize." She gestured at the barn, at the furniture visible through the house windows, at the repaired fences stretching across the property. "You have helped me rebuild not just my ranch, but my life." He set down the stone he was carrying and came to her. "You did the same for me. I was adrift when I came to Kansas, not sure what I was looking for. You gave me purpose, direction, love." "We gave each other those things," Theodora corrected softly. "That is what partners do." The wedding day arrived cold and clear. Colton dressed in his best clothes, a suit he had purchased in Wichita specifically for the occasion. It felt strange after months of wearing work clothes, but when he saw himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the refined gentleman looking back. His hair was neatly trimmed for the first time in months, his beard shaped and groomed. He looked respectable, settled, like a man ready to take on the responsibility of a wife and a ranch. William drove them to Wichita in his wagon, Sarah chattering cheerfully the entire way about everything and nothing. Theodora sat beside Colton, unusually quiet, her gloved hand held firmly in his. She wore a dress of deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, her hair braided and pinned up in a style more elegant than her usual practical plait. She was beautiful in a way that made Colton's chest tight with emotion. The church was small and simple, exactly what they had wanted. The minister was an elderly man who had known Theodora since childhood. He looked at her with genuine affection as they stood before him, Colton beside her and William and Sarah as witnesses. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and Colton felt the weight and significance of the moment settle over him like a mantle. The vows were traditional, the words worn smooth by centuries of repetition. But when Colton promised to love and cherish Theodora in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them, he meant every syllable with an intensity that surprised him. This was not just a social contract or a legal arrangement. This was a sacred promise to build a life with this woman, to be her partner and protector and friend for all the years they were given. When Theodora made the same promises, her voice was clear and strong, her eyes never leaving Colton's face. Whatever reservations she might have had were gone now. She was committing herself to this marriage to him with her whole heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said. "You may kiss your bride." Colton cupped Theodora's face in his hands and kissed her gently, aware of their audience but unable to stop himself. She kissed him back with equal tenderness, and when they parted, both were smiling. "Mr. and Mrs. Colton Kershaw," the minister announced with satisfaction. "Theodora Kershaw." It sounded right to Colton's ears, though he knew she would probably continue using right in most business dealings. That was fine with him. Names were less important than the reality of what they had just committed to. They celebrated with a simple dinner at the hotel restaurant in Wichita. William seemed to have made his peace with the marriage, toasting them with genuine warmth. Sarah cried happy tears and pressed a package into Theodora's hands. "Linens for the new bed," she explained. "Every couple needs fresh linens." The journey back to the ranch took most of the afternoon. William and Sarah departed for their own home with final congratulations and promises to visit soon. And then Colton and Theodora were alone, standing in front of the house they would now share as husband and wife. "Well, Mrs. Kershaw," Colton said, deliberately using her new name. "Well, Mr. Kershaw," Theodora replied, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. The wedding night was tender and passionate in equal measure. Theodora had been married before and knew what to expect, but for Colton, this was entirely new territory. He had been with women before, but never someone he loved with such depth, never in the sanctity of marriage. The intimacy was overwhelming in the best possible way, a physical expression of the emotional bond they had forged. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed Colton had built, Theodora's head resting on his chest as their breathing slowly returned to normal. "I never thought I would feel this way again," Theodora murmured. "This complete, this happy." Colton pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I never felt this way before, not with anyone, not even. No, I cared for other women, but this is different. You are different." He tightened his arms around her. "You are everything, Theodora." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I need to tell you something about Joseph." Colton waited, sensing this was important. "I loved him deeply, completely. He was my whole world for 5 years." She took a shaky breath. "When he died, part of me died too. I thought that was it for me, that I had used up my allotment of love and happiness. And now I realize the heart is more generous than I knew. I still love Joseph. I always will. But I also love you, Colton. Differently, but no less deeply. You are not replacing him. You are writing a new chapter, one I did not think I would get to have. I am honored to be that chapter, Colton said softly. Just so we are clear, Theodora added, a hint of her usual forthrightness returning. I am keeping his photograph in the sitting room, and I will probably still talk about him sometimes. Of course, he was part of your life, part of who you are. I would never ask you to erase that. She lifted her head to look at him in the dim lamplight. How did I get so lucky twice in one lifetime? I am the lucky one, Colton countered. A beautiful, intelligent, capable woman agreed to marry me despite only knowing me for 2 months. I am the luckiest man in Kansas. Theodora laughed and kissed him, and the conversation ended there as they came together again in the darkness. Two people building something new from the ashes of the past. Winter settled over the prairie in earnest. Snow fell in late December, transforming the landscape into a white expanse broken only by the dark lines of fence posts and the distant smudges of tree groves. The horses stayed in the barn most days, and Colton and Theodora worked together to keep them fed and comfortable. The routine was demanding but satisfying, the kind of honest labor that left them tired and content at the end of each day. Colton completed his forge in January, building it inside a sturdy shed he constructed specifically for that purpose. The first time he fired it up and began working iron again, Theodora came to watch, fascinated by the transformation of raw metal under his hammer. "It is like magic," she said, eyes wide as he shaped a horseshoe. "Just heat and pressure, and knowing how the metal wants to move," Colton replied, but he was pleased by her interest. Word spread quickly among the neighboring ranches that a skilled blacksmith had set up shop at the old Wright place. Within 2 weeks, Colton had more work than he could handle alone. He made horseshoes, repaired wagon wheels, fashioned hinges and latches, and created custom tools for ranchers who needed something specific. The income was steady and good, helping to rebuild their financial reserves. Theodora continued working with her horses, and in February, the first of her mares foaled. It was a difficult birth, the mare struggling through the night while Theodora and Colton took turns staying with her. When the foal finally emerged in the early morning hours, a perfect colt with his mother's bay coloring and a white star on his forehead, Theodora actually cried. "He is beautiful," she whispered, watching the colt struggle to his feet on wobbly legs. "Like his owner," Colton said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. 3 more foals arrived over the following month, all healthy and strong. Theodora's breeding program was working exactly as she had hoped, and she began making plans to acquire that championship stallion she wanted. "We will need to travel to Denver," she told Colton one evening over supper. "There is an auction in May where they are selling off a racing stable. I heard they have a 3-year-old stud that would be perfect for our program." "Then we will go to Denver," Colton agreed easily. "It will cost significant money. We have the money. Between your horse sales and my blacksmithing, we are doing well." Theodora smiled at his easy use of we and our. They had truly become partners in every sense of the word. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. The prairie exploded into color with wildflowers, and warm rains turned the grass a vibrant green. Colton planted a vegetable garden near the house, something he remembered his mother doing when he was young. Theodora teased him about it initially, but had to admit the fresh produce was welcome. They made the journey to Denver in late May, traveling by train and staying in a hotel for 3 nights. It was Theodora's first time in a real city, and her eyes were huge as she took in the tall buildings and crowded streets. "How did you stand this?" she asked Colton, pressed close to his side as they navigated the busy sidewalks. "You get used to it, but I prefer our ranch." "Our ranch," Theodora repeated, smiling at the phrase. "I like the sound of that. The auction was held at a large stable on the outskirts of Denver. Theodora walked through the stalls with the sharp eye of an expert, assessing each horse's conformation, temperament, and bloodlines. When she reached the 3-year-old stallion stall, she stopped and simply stared. "That is the one," she said with absolute certainty. The stallion was magnificent, a dark chestnut with impeccable lines and an intelligent eye. Colton knew nothing about horse breeding, but even he could see this was a superior animal. "He will not be cheap," Colton warned. "Worth every penny," Theodora replied. The bidding was fierce, but Theodora was determined. When the price climbed past $500, Colton felt his stomach clench, but he kept his face neutral. When it hit $700, most of the other bidders dropped out. At $850, only one other buyer remained, a well-dressed man who looked like he had money to spare. "900, Theodora called out, her voice clear and confident. The other buyer hesitated, then shook his head and stepped back. The auctioneer brought down his hammer. "Sold to the lady for $900. It was a staggering sum, nearly a third of their entire savings. But when Theodora turned to Colton with a radiant smile, he knew it was worth it. "We have our foundation stud," she said, eyes shining. "This horse will make our reputation." They named him Denver's Pride and transported him back to Kansas, with all the care due to such a valuable animal. The stallion settled into his new home with surprising ease, and by summer's end, Theodora had bred him to all 6 of her mares. "Next spring," she told Colton, "we will have foals that people will travel from 3 states to see." Life fell into a comfortable rhythm over the following months. Colton worked his forge during the cooler morning hours, broke for the midday meal with Theodora, then spent afternoons helping with ranch work. They added a few cattle to their operation, diversifying their income sources. Colton built additional corrals and a chicken coop that actually kept the foxes out, unlike Theodora's previous attempts. They grew together in the way of couples who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Theodora would sit in Colton's forge sometimes, watching him work while she mended tack or read from a horse breeding journal. Colton would help Theodora train the yearlings, learning to read a horse's body language and respond appropriately. They talked about everything, argued occasionally about minor things, and always made up before going to sleep. In September, exactly 1 year after Colton had first arrived at the ranch, Theodora made an announcement over breakfast. "I am pregnant," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Colton nearly dropped his coffee cup. "You are certain?" "I am 2 months late and sick every morning, I am certain." She watched his face anxiously. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy." Colton crossed to her side and pulled her up into his arms, spinning her around in a circle. "Theodora, I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic," she laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Put me down, you fool. I am pregnant, not made of glass." But her smile was as radiant as sunshine, and when Colton kissed her, she kissed him back with all the love she felt. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Theodora remained active, insisting she was perfectly capable of ranch work despite Colton's growing protectiveness. They compromised. She would continue doing what she felt comfortable with, but would accept help with the heavier tasks. "I am having a baby, not dying," she reminded him frequently. "I know, but I am allowed to worry about my wife and our child." The baby was born on a warm May morning in 1880, arriving with surprising speed after Theodora's water broke during breakfast. Sarah had come to stay for the final month of pregnancy, prepared to serve as midwife, and she barely had time to get Theodora to bed before the baby made its entrance into the world. Colton paced the sitting room, listening to Theodora's laboring sounds from upstairs, and feeling utterly helpless. When he finally heard a baby's cry, strong and healthy, his knees actually went weak with relief. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, beaming. "You have a son, Colton, and Theodora is doing fine." He took the stairs 3 at a time and burst into the bedroom. Theodora was propped up against pillows, sweaty and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle, a red-faced infant with a surprising amount of dark hair. "Meet your son," Theodora said softly. Colton approached slowly, almost reverently. The baby was perfect, with tiny fingers and toes and eyes that blinked up at him with unfocused wonder. "Can I hold him?" Colton asked. Theodora carefully transferred the baby into his arms, showing him how to support the head. The weight was minimal, but the responsibility felt enormous. This tiny person was his son, his and Theodora's, a new life they had created together. "We should name him," Theodora said. "I was thinking, if you agree, we could call him Joseph Colton Kershaw, after both the men I have loved." Colton looked at her with tears in his eyes. "I would be honored." "Joey," Theodora murmured, reaching out to stroke the baby's downy head. "Little Joey." The baby made a small sound, something between a squeak and a sigh, and both parents laughed with the giddy joy of new parenthood. Life with an infant was harder than Colton had anticipated. Joey was a healthy baby, but demanded constant attention. Theodora insisted on nursing him herself rather than hiring a wet nurse, which meant interrupted sleep and exhaustion. But watching her with their son, seeing the fierce love in her eyes, made every difficult moment worthwhile. Colton took on more of the ranch work to give Theodora time to recover and bond with Joey. The 6 foals sired by Denver's Pride arrived throughout the spring, and each one was as magnificent as Theodora had predicted. Word spread quickly, and by the time the foals were 3 months old, Theodora had received inquiries from buyers in Kansas, Colorado, and even as far as California. "We did it," she told Colton one evening, bouncing Joey gently while reviewing the letters of inquiry. "The ranch is going to be successful, truly successful." "You did it," Colton corrected. "This was your vision, your expertise. But I could not have done it without you. Without the barn you built, without the financial stability your blacksmithing brought, without your support when I was pregnant and after Joey was born." She reached over to squeeze his hand. "We are partners, Colton, in everything." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered as Theodora's reputation as a horse breeder grew. Denver's Pride sired champion after champion, and buyers paid premium prices for horses carrying his bloodline. Colton's blacksmithing business expanded to the point where he hired an apprentice, a young man named Daniel who showed real aptitude for the work. Joey grew from infant to toddler to a sturdy little boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. He was fearless around horses, much to Theodora's pride and Colton's concern. By the time he was 3, he was already begging for his own pony. In the spring of 1883, Theodora gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Colton's mother. Maggie was a quieter baby than Joey had been, content to observe the world with solemn dark eyes. She had Colton's coloring but Theodora's stubborn chin, a combination that would serve her well in life. 2 children, Theodora marveled one evening, watching Colton rock Maggie to sleep while Joey played with wooden horses at her feet. "I never imagined I would have this. After Joseph died, I thought I would be alone forever." "Fate had other plans," Colton said quietly. "You had other plans," she corrected. "You showed up at my ranch and refused to leave my life. Best decision I ever made." By 1885, the ranch had grown to include 12 broodmares, Denver's Pride, and 2 younger stallions, and a reputation that extended throughout the Western Territories. They had built additional barns, hired 2 full-time ranch hands, and purchased an adjoining property to expand their grazing land. Financially, they were more secure than either had dreamed possible when Colton first arrived 7 years earlier. Joey was now 5 years old and already working with the gentler horses under Theodora's supervision. Maggie, nearly 2, showed signs of inheriting her mother's way with animals. The children were growing up healthy and happy, surrounded by wide open spaces and the love of 2 parents who adored them. But Theodora wanted one more child. "Are you certain?" Colton asked when she brought it up. "2 pregnancies were hard on you." "I am certain. I want our family to be complete. 3 feels right." Colton could not argue with that. Their 3rd child, another son they named William after Theodora's brother, was born in the spring of 1886. Billy was a large baby, over 9 pounds, and the birth was difficult. Sarah had to call for the doctor from Wichita, and there were a few terrifying hours when Colton feared he might lose Theodora. But she was strong, as she had always been, and she pulled through. Billy nursed lustily from the first moment, and Theodora recovered with the resilience Colton had come to expect from her. 3 children, Colton said, looking at his growing family with wonder. "We have 3 children." "Our family is complete," Theodora agreed, settling Billy more comfortably in her arms while Joey and Maggie peered at their new brother with curiosity. "This is everything I needed." Uncle William, for whom Billy was named, visited frequently and had developed a genuine affection for Colton over the years. He no longer viewed him with suspicion but as a true brother. The legal document Colton had offered to sign before the wedding had never been drawn up, because William realized it was unnecessary. Colton loved the ranch as much as Theodora did, worked as hard as she did to make it successful, and treated it as a partnership rather than a possession. Life settled into a new rhythm with 3 children. The ranch continued to prosper. Denver's Pride was now 10 years old and recognized throughout the region as one of the finest breeding stallions in Kansas. Foals sired by him commanded prices that would have seemed impossible when Theodora first started her breeding program. Colton's forge had expanded to the point where he now employed 2 apprentices and took commissions from as far away as Denver and St. Louis. He had developed a reputation for high-quality ornamental ironwork in addition to practical items, and the decorative gates and railings he created were sought after by wealthy ranchers and town merchants. They added onto the house twice, creating more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The property was beautiful now, well-maintained and prosperous-looking. Theodora planted trees around the house, cottonwoods and oaks that would provide shade for future generations. Colton built a swing for the children, hanging it from the sturdy branch of the largest oak tree. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December of 1889, Colton and Theodora took a rare evening to themselves. Sarah had agreed to watch the children overnight, giving them time alone in the house they had built together. They sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. The prairie stretched away in all directions, silent and vast under the starlight. 10 years, Theodora said softly. 10 years since I married a man I barely knew. Do you regret it? Colton asked, though he knew the answer. Not for a single moment. She turned to look at him, her face visible in the lamplight spilling from the windows. You gave me back my life, Colton. You helped me believe I could be happy again. You built this ranch with me, gave me 3 beautiful children, and loved me through everything. You did the same for me, Colton replied. I was lost when I came here. I had given up on finding a place where I belonged, but you gave me a home, a purpose, a family, everything that matters. When you first arrived, I thought you were just another drifter passing through, Theodora admitted. "I never imagined you would become the center of my entire world." Colton pulled her closer, tucking her against his side. "I used to hammer iron in the city, making other people's tools and fixtures. I thought that was all my life would ever be. But then I came here and found better work. Building barns," Theodora teased, "building a life with you. Building something that will last beyond us, something we can pass down to our children." He gestured at the ranch surrounding them. "This is my masterpiece, not the forge or the furniture or any individual thing I have made, but this life we created together." Theodora was quiet for a long moment, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you know what I love most about you? What? You see me. Not who you want me to be, not some ideal woman you are trying to shape me into. You see exactly who I am, with all my rough edges and stubborn independence, and you love me anyway." "I love you because of those things, not despite them," Colton corrected. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly across the sky. From inside the house came the faint ticking of the clock Colton had built, marking time in their shared life. The years continued to pass in the way years do, each one bringing changes but also continuity. Joey grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence and work ethic. By the time he was 12, he was working the ranch as capably as any adult, and he had inherited both his mother's way with horses and his father's skill with tools. Maggie surprised them all by developing a passion for learning. She begged for books, devoured every newspaper that came to the ranch, and announced at age 8 that she intended to become a teacher. Theodora and Colton enrolled her in the school that had been established in Wichita, making the long trip once a week so she could attend classes. Billy was the wild one, always exploring the hills and getting into minor scrapes. He had his father's build and his mother's fearlessness, a combination that resulted in several broken bones and countless close calls by the time he was 10. But he had a huge heart and a generous nature that endeared him to everyone he met. Denver's pride died peacefully in his stall in the spring of 1895, at the respectable age of 20. Theodora mourned him as she would a friend, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a proper marker. But his legacy lived on in the dozens of champions he had sired, and the reputation of the ranch that bore his bloodline. Theodora was 41 now, her hair showing the first threads of silver at the temples, but she was still strong and capable, still working the ranch every day. Colton was 43, his muscles still hard from constant physical labor, though his hair had gone mostly gray. They had both aged into their roles, comfortable in their skins and their life together. The ranch now encompassed over 2,000 acres, employed 6 full-time hands, and was known throughout the West as the premier source for quality horses. Joey had begun taking on more responsibility, clearly positioning himself to eventually take over the operation. Maggie had indeed become a teacher, though she continued to live at home and help with the ranch during summers and weekends. Billy announced his intention to become a veterinarian, having developed a particular skill for healing sick and injured animals. In the summer of 1898, 20 years after Colton first arrived at the ranch, they held a celebration. William and Sarah came, along with their now grown children and grandchildren. Several neighboring ranchers attended, as did many of the people who had purchased horses from them over the years. The party stretched long into the evening, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. As the sun set in spectacular fashion, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Colton found Theodora standing a bit apart from the crowd, looking out over the land they had built together. "Thinking about Joseph?" he asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. "A little," she admitted. "He should have been here to see all this. He would have been so proud of what we built." "He would have been proud of you," Colton said, "and I like to think he would approve of us, of our family." Theodora reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I think he would. I think he would be glad I found love again, found happiness. He was never the type to want me to mourn forever." "Neither am I," Colton said. "When my time comes, I want you to keep living, keep loving, keep finding joy." "Do not talk about dying," Theodora said firmly. "We have many more years together." And indeed they did. They grew old together on their ranch, watching their children grow into capable adults, welcoming grandchildren with joy, and continuing to work the land they loved well into their 60s. Joey married a rancher's daughter from Colorado and took over the primary management of the horse breeding operation. Maggie married a doctor and moved to Wichita but visited frequently with her children. Billy became a veterinarian as planned and established a practice that served ranchers throughout Kansas and the neighboring territories. Colton continued working his forge until his hands grew too stiff with arthritis, then transitioned to teaching others his craft. Theodora remained involved with the horses until the day she died at age 72, peacefully in her sleep with Colton holding her hand. Losing her was the hardest thing Colton had ever endured. They had been married for 48 years, nearly half a century of partnership and love. The ranch felt empty without her, even surrounded by children and grandchildren. But Colton took comfort in the life they had built together, the legacy they were leaving behind. He lived 4 more years after Theodora's death, dying at age 80 in the house he had helped build, in the bed he had constructed with his own hands. His children and grandchildren surrounded him, and his last words were of Theodora. "Tell her I am coming," he murmured. "Tell her I kept my promise. I loved her with everything I was for as long as I lived." And then Colton Kershaw closed his eyes for the final time, content in the knowledge that he had lived a good life, a meaningful life. He had come to Kansas as a drifter looking for work, and he had found so much more. He had found purpose and partnership. He had found a woman who challenged and complimented him. He had found children who carried forward the best of both their parents. He had found a place where he belonged, where his strength and skill could build something lasting. The ranch continued for generations after Colton and Theodora were gone, run by their descendants, who remembered the story of how a city blacksmith and a widowed rancher had built something extraordinary together. The main barn Colton constructed still stood strong over a century later, testament to his craftsmanship. The bloodlines Theodora established continued to produce champion horses recognized throughout the country. But their true legacy was not the ranch or the horses or the buildings that bore their labor. Their true legacy was the love they had shared, the partnership they had forged, the family they had created. It was the example they set of 2 broken people finding each other and choosing to build something new together rather than remain lost in grief and loneliness. Colton had used to hammer iron for a living in the city, shaping metal into useful forms. But he had found better work on a Kansas ranch, building a life with a remarkable woman, building a home where there had been ashes, building a future from the fragments of the past, building love that lasted beyond their own lifetimes, rippling forward through generations. It was the best work he had ever done, and he had been honored to do it alongside Theodora, his partner in all things, for nearly half a century. Their story became a legend in their family, passed down to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren as an example of what real love looked like. Not perfect or effortless, but strong and true and built to last. And on the prairie they had loved, the wind continued to move through the grass like water, the sky stretched infinite and blue, and the land they had worked together remained, testament to what two people could build when they chose partnership over isolation, love over fear, and hope over despair.